Here we are on Mem Gimel Amid Beis at the Mishnah. So it's 43b1, the Mishnah. I'm pretty sure. I think we got it to the Mishnah. We were talking about when the up until the Mishnah there is that if the father dies and the brothers are supporting their sister from the Kesuva, does she get to keep her own money, her wages? So that's what we got up to the Mishnah. So the Mishnah says Hama'aris bito v'girsha irsa v'nis armala. So if a man took money or whatever to betroth his daughter because she was still a katana, and then they got divorced from before the marriage, after the erison, then erison v'nis armala, then they decided to do erison again, and she got divorced again. Excuse me, and then the man died, so she was widowed from the erison, not from the full wedding. So Kesuvos or shalo, the father gets to keep the ksuva money. So this seems to say that, so Rashi points out that this accords to an opinion that when you do erison, you write a ksuva. And we don't do that, but this is according to that opinion. Hisiya v'girsha, hisiya v'nisar malach, ksuvas shalo. If he married her off, meaning he didn't just betroth her, but then she had chuppah, and then she got divorced, and then she got married another time, and then she became widowed from the second marriage, ksuvasa shala, she gets to keep the ksuva from when she was widowed. Rabbi Huda mer harishona shel av. Rabbi Huda says the first one, that if she got divorced, well, she's divorced, she doesn't have the ksuva anymore. The Gemara will explain what it's talking about. Amrullah, they said to him, Mishesia ain levi reshusba. But once she had nisuin, the father doesn't have any she leaves his control once she got married. So once she had nisuin, the father would not get a ksuva, because once she got married, even if she's still a katana at this point when she became widowed, she would keep her ksuva. So the Gemara says, "Taima disiya v'girsha hisiya v'nisarmala." The reason why she gets to keep the ksuva is if she was divorced from the first marriage and then the second marriage, she became a widow. But if she would have gotten married twice and widowed twice, we wouldn't get her married. She wouldn't be allowed to marry anyone anymore. And by the way, the Tana is quietly paskening like Rabbi, the Amr betrays Zimne Havi Chazaka, that 2 times make a Chazaka. So a Chazaka, normally we know that a Chazaka is something, we spoke about it at length a few weeks ago, for a few weeks, about a shore becoming a muad, that it's been habituated to injuring by goring. If it does it 3 times, it's called habituated for goring, and then when it gores again, you pay full damages. So Chazaka normally happens when something happens 3 times. However, the Gemara paskins, well, I mean, it's machlokas tanaim, but when things that are related to suffix nefashos, if it has to do with someone potentially dying, we do 2 times already makes it a chazaka. So, for example, if 2 brothers had bris milah and died from the bris milah, basically the reason is because they were hemophiliac, so they didn't clot. So from the bris milah, they kept bleeding and they die. When a 3rd brother is born, you don't give a bris milah to the 3rd brother. You're not allowed to, because we're worried that he's also going to die from the same disease that his brothers have. But normally a chazaka needs 3 times. So, for example, if a woman sees nida blood on the same day of the month for 3 consecutive months, those 3 times make her to have what we call a veset, which is basically the idea of a chazaka in regard to hilchos nida. But in regard to things we're worried that the 3rd brother is going to die, so after only 2, it's considered a chazaka. And a similar case is that there's halacha that if a woman is married to 2 husbands and they both die, we're worried that there's something about her that's causing them to die, so we don't let her marry a 3rd time, because maybe the 3rd husband's going to die also. So already, Ramosha Feinstein said, when a lady, there was a certain woman, her husband died relatively young, probably early 40s. Then she got married, and she was married for like another 40 years, and her husband died, and he was 100 years old, and he died. So because she was widowed twice, she can't get, she's probably in her 80s now, so I don't know if she wants to get remarried. But let's say she got married, her husband died, then she got married, and her husband died, but he was not young anymore. Whether she married someone who was much older than her or not, let's say someone in his mid-60s or older, maybe it's a little young, but it's not an unusually young age to die. So Moshe Feinstein already said, and I don't know if we needed Moshe Feinstein to tell us this, that when the second husband dies, but he's at an advanced age, she's allowed to get remarried because we're not worried that he died because of her. If two young people would Rahman al-Islam die being married to her, we wouldn't let her get married a third time. It's a halacha called katlanis. But if the second husband would have been old and he died, so then we would let her remarry. We wouldn't say the halacha katlanis applies. So that's what. So basically, the Gemara was making a diuk from the Mishnah that said it was the third line in the Mishnah, that if she got married and got divorced and then got married and then got widowed. But so the Gemara is making a deal. If the Mishnah would have said if she got married and widowed and married and widowed, then she wouldn't be allowed to get married again. That's what the Gemara is saying over here. Okay, for 43b2, the second paragraph. Rabbi Yehuda Mer Rishona Shel Av. Rabbi Yehuda says the first ksuva goes to the father. My time at Rabbi Yehuda. What's Rabbi Yehuda's reason? Rabbi Rav Yosef, the Amri Travaihu, Hoel Mishas Erisin Zachabahen Ha'av, because from the time of Erisin, she earns her ksuva, and since at that time he's the one who married her off, and she's under his control, so he gets the ksuva. Masiv Rava asks, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Harishona Shel Av, Umoda Rabbi Yehuda b'ma'aretz despitok shiktana uvag Rabbi Achar Kachnise shein levir reshus ba. There's a brisa that says Rabbi Yehuda says the father gets the first ksuva, but Rabbi Yehuda agrees that if he had betrothed his daughter when she was a ketana, but then in the meantime she became a bogeres, and then she got married, meaning in those times the engagement was a year long. There was Erison, and then a year later was Nesuin, was the chuppah, and in this case so the 6 months of Nara, she was a Ketana, and then she became a Nara, and then 6 months later she became a Bogeres. So with the betrothal, she was a Ketana, and a year later she's already a Bogeres. She went through the stages of Nara, and she entered the stage of Bogeres. So Rabbi Yehuda agrees that her father doesn't have any control over her, so she gets to keep so she would keep her own ksuva if her husband would die. So according to the reason of Rabbi Rav Yosef, Amai, why would she get to keep it? The father has no share in it. Hachinami lema hoel mishas erisin zacha behem ha'av. According to your reason, since she earns the ksuva, according to this opinion, from the time of Erison, here too she was a ketana, so the father should get the ksuva. It doesn't matter that she became a bogeres before the time that she got married, but before the chuppah. So elei itmar hachi itmar. So if you want to learn it, this is what must have been taught by Rabbi and Rav Yosef. Rabbi Rav Yosef Dami Travayu Hol Versusa Nichtavim Umigva Me'emas Gavia. Hoel Versusa Nichtavim. So he gets to the ksuva since it was written while she was still under his control. So in this case, if it wasn't written until she was a Bogeres, so it wasn't written under his control. So Rabbi Yehuda would agree that she doesn't get it, that the father doesn't get it. Rashi points out that Nichtavim, it makes it sound like it's a plural. Rashi says it's the commitment and the $200 of the ksuva. So then the Gemara says, Umigva me'emas gavia. So when can she collect? So Umigva means to collect. So in regard to collecting the ksuva, when can she collect? So the halacha is that so the ksuva takes precedence over all of the husband's assets. So if he would have recently sold a field, but then there's a ksuva, the people who bought the field are going to lose the field, and somehow they'll have to try to pay them back in another way. But the field would go to the ksuva since the ksuva was dated first. So Rashi says that in regard to the father getting the ksuva, let's say if the husband would have died, so he would get the daughter's ksuva, and we see that it doesn't follow the eris, and even according to Rabbi Yehuda. So it seems, so would he be able to collect fields that had been sold from the time of Erison? Or only is it not until the time it was written? So we don't write a ksuva until right before the chuppah. But it seems that according to this, to what we're assuming right now, the ksuva may have been written maybe even a few months before the chuppah. So could she only collect starting from things that got sold after the date that her ksuva is dated, or does it go even earlier than it was dated from the time she was betrothed, according to this opinion that the father would be zoch and the ksuva from the time that it was written? So Amrav Huna Mana Masai Mina Erison. So the 100 or the 200 zuz that she could collect is from the erison, meaning if she's a virgin, she would get 200. If she's a widow or a divorcee, the ksuva is only 100. So that main part of the ksuva, that amount is collectible from the date that the erison happened. So even though the ksuva wasn't written for even many months after that, the tosefes mina nasuin, but any amount that they added over that, that additional amount is only collectible from the date that it was actually written. Now, Rav Huna actually says the day of the Nesuin, but it probably means the day it was written. Rav Asi says, Echad zeh mina Nesuin. No, you're not allowed to collect anything until the date of the Nesuin. Larry, looking for something in the Gemara over there? Okay. So the Gemara now asks, did Rav Huna really say that you're able to collect the main part of the ksuva, the 100 or 200 zuz, from the time of the erison? But we have learned, what if the wife takes out 2 ksuvos? So obviously she was married to him once, but one ksuva said, one says it's a ksuva of 200 and one says 300. Rav Huna. So you can't, both of them aren't payable. Only one of them is payable. Which one is the one that is enforced? The first one or the second one? Rav Huna says, Basa ligvos masayin. If she wants to only collect 200, gova mizman rishon. She could collect from the earlier of the 2 ksuvas. Shlosh meos, if she wants to collect 300, which means not just the basic ksuva, but an additional amount, then gova mizman sheni. She could only collect that from the later date. Hold on, I have to let someone in. Okay, so if she had 2 ksuvas, so what can she collect? So if she's trying to only collect 200, she can collect from the earlier date. If she's trying to collect the tosef, the ksuva plus the bonus that her husband added onto her, do you remember? Did we talk about this? Do you remember how much they wanted Ira to add in the ksuva? Because in Israel they do a lot of things. They actually add money, and like in Moroccans, they're like 6 is a big number, so they add like 666,666 shekel to the ksuva. Here we don't do that, but in Israel it's a big thing.
Yeah, maybe Ellie big numbers.
I've only been to one wedding there, so I have no idea what it was. The Amar of Huna, and about that halacha, Basali was the Isa, and if the answer that we just said, that Rav Huna says that the 200, the main is collectible from the earlier date, and the bonus is on the ksuva with the bonus is only collectible from the later date. Tigvi Masai Mizman Rishon Umea Mizman Sheni. she should be allowed to collect 200 from the earlier date and 100 from the later date. Why do we separate and say, well, if she's only trying to collect 200, then it's from the earlier date. If she's trying to collect 300, it's from the later date. According to what Rav Huna is saying here, 200 should always be collectible from the earlier date. So, well, according to that, why don't she collect 500? She should collect both shtaros. Meaning, in the second opinion, the second statement of Rav Huna about the woman who produces two ksuvas, there's something fishy going on there, because you're not supposed to have two contracts for the same exact transaction, especially when they don't even match here. One's for 200, one's 300. Masai mizman rishon plus mea mizman sheni. We have 200 for an earlier date and 300 from a second date. So according to that, she should be able to collect both. El chamesh meos my time lo gavia. So why don't you say that she could collect all 500, meaning the sum of both things? Kaven lo kasavla savisi vosifis lo tasmeos amasayim. Since he didn't write her in the second ksuva, I am adding 300 to the original 200 that I gave you. Meaning, lahavdil, I've heard of, Baruch Hashem hasn't been recently, but I heard of the updated rings, meaning they gave a diamond and then, 10, 15 years later, they have to get the wife a bigger diamond. So here, you originally had, he gave her a regular ksuva, and then a few years later, he's deciding to upgrade her ksuva. So he writes another star, and he says, I'm giving you an additional 300 ksuva. So in that case, we know that that it's being added to the second ksuva. In this case, it doesn't say I'm adding. It just sounds like a regular ksuva of 300. So what's going on here? Since he didn't write Savisi Vosifis plus Me'asamasayin, he didn't say I'm adding 300 to the 200 that I previously gave you. Hachi Kamerla. This is what he means by giving her a second star. Imizman Rishon Gavyat Gvia Masayim. If you want to collect from the first date, you can collect 200. Lahavdil or Monopoly could have gotten it from right here. Pass go, collect 200. But if you want to take from the second date, you could collect 300. So that's the reason why she's not able to collect 300 when she's trying to collect from the first star. Since he didn't say I'm adding another 100 to the original 200, he's telling her that she should be mochel the original star, meaning, because what's going on here, the whole thing of the whole significance of the dates of the ksuva is, like we said, if he had sold a field after the date, she can seize it back from the person who had bought it. Now that person's not going to be stuck without the money, they'll have to be refunded, but they don't get the field anymore, because it's considered that this field was not just mortgaged but indebted. Archko used the word lien, which is a perfectly good word also. It was already had a lien on the ksuva. So by him giving her the second ksuva, he's saying that any property sold after this date, if you want to take your ksuva money from those properties, I'll give you 300. If you want to take from properties that I sold beforehand, you're only going to get 200. That's what that means. Does that make sense? I mean, he had a bunch of different fields. Some he sold in January, some he sold in March. The original star was the end of December. So if she wants to use that star, which is for only 200, the stuff he sold in January, she can collect her ksuva from the fields that he sold in January. But if he gave her a different ksuva at the end of February, and then he had sold more fields in March, he's telling her that if you're willing to take the fields that I sold in March, you could take $300 or 300 zuz worth of fields. That's what it means. Okay, so now we're on the third line of Mem Dalet Amud Aleph, 44a1, the second paragraph in the Art Scroll. Amar Mar, we said before in the Brisa, or the statement, I think it was a Gemara statement, not a Mishnah statement. If she wants to collect from this ksuva, the $200 one, she can. If she wants to collect from the other one, the $300 one, she can. So lema pliga de Rav Nachman. Let's say that this psak argues that Rav Huna is arguing in Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman says, "Shtei shar sayotzim bezachar zeh." If someone brings two shtaros for the same thing, so first he brings star A and then he brings star B, but they're talking about the same transaction. lahavdil nowadays, when you do a real estate transaction, they survey it, and so they have the plots and the this and that. They have a plat of survey to tell you exactly what field you're buying. So they knew that these two shtaros were talking about the same exact transaction. They didn't necessarily have to be a real estate. I'm just using it as an example, but because when we're talking about a ksuva, the most part we'd be talking about her seizing real estate. So two shtaros that the person brings two of them, but so they're dated different days, but they're clearly talking about the same transaction. Bitul sheni as rishon. The second one nullifies the first. So Rav Nachman says the second nullifies the first. So the fact that Rav Huna says she could choose to collect either 200 from the first date or 300 from the second date, that shows that the second one doesn't nullify the first. So is it a machlokas amoraim between Rav Huna and Rav Nachman if the second star nullifies the first star? So the Gemara says, Lav mi yitmar alav, but didn't we learn about that, about Rav Nachman's statement, Amar Papa Umoda Rav Nachman di Osif Beidikla Letosefes Kasve. If he added a palm tree to it, then he's coming to add on. Hachanami ha'osif lamidi. So Rav Nachman agrees that if you have two shtaros for the same field, whatever, but we see that in the second thing something had been added. So the tree, makes it the property a little bit more valuable. So if he writes, so in that case, that we're writing it for the addition, it means that that we're not nullifying the first, but it's clear that the second star is adding onto something before. So hachanami ha'osaf lamidi. So here, in the case where he wrote her a second ksuva, he's adding something. So even Rav Nachman would agree to Rav Huna that in this case, the second ksuva is not nullifying it, because he's giving her potential to her choice. If she wants, depending on which field she would want to collect from, she's able to get more. So he's not nullifying the first star. He's just giving her an option. So he's giving her an option, which is potentially adding onto the original ksuva.
That's fine.
So that's right. That's right. That's fine. Well, she would collect the field, and then I guess she could sell the field. But I'm saying he had sold the field. But the halacha is that that she has first dibs on everything. So anything that got sold after he was already indebted, his property was already indebted or liened to pay her ksuva. So the people who bought the field, you repossess it from them, and they would have to get a refund, and she would get the field, and then she could do whatever she wants with it. Mike, do you have a question?
No.
Okay.
Wouldn't automatically want to write a new star and you're adding something additional, let's say, wouldn't you connect it to the first? Wouldn't it be written in the document that you're either overriding it or
Right.
adding to that particular
Right. So the thing is that in those days, Chicago Title or whoever doesn't hold on to the documents. So the transaction took place. So now the buyer would have the star as a proof that he owned it. So now if the seller was changing something, he was adding on this, to include this tree or whatever, he would write another star. So since he is adding something to it, he's not the one who's holding on to the star. So he's not necessarily able to add on to a star. But that's a separate question. Once a star is written, if you would put something underneath, is it that's a separate question. I don't know the answer to, do you write more than one star on one piece of paper? Not usually. But I guess in legal, nowadays we call it addendums, or I forget what they call it in the real estate contracts. But I think you're asking, wouldn't it be an addendum to the original? And I think the answer is, in those days, this was the way you made an addendum. But why wasn't it written on the same piece of paper? Because the person who would have to write the star, who would be the seller or the giver, he's not the one holding on to the star, because the seller or the buyer or the receiver is the one who would hold on to the star, because now it's his proof that he owns the land. So it wasn't in his hands to write on more stuff underneath it. So he wrote a second star.
Well, we're also talking about the ketubah.
Yeah. So who's supposed to have the ksuva? The wife is supposed to have the ksuva. The husband doesn't need to know where the ksuva is. So if he wants to add on to it, he's going to write another document. That's exactly what I said. It's not, because if he's the one who's willing to give her more money now, he doesn't have the original ksuva to change it. He needs to write a new one. But then the thing is that we had the text before. What was the exact words here? So basically, it's a way of this star is acknowledging that there's a previous star and that this is adding on to what he is committing to her from the previous star. Halachically, if you would write this star hereby revokes previous stars, I don't know if that works halachically. I know from the Three Stooges, I shump the stooge. Well, no, that wasn't. But I shump the stooge hereby of unsound mind, hereby write my last will and testament. But we know from other things that you write this hereby revokes all previous wills. If that works halachically, I don't know. But there's a statement. If you're adding to it, you say tzavisi va'osifis lach. I've decided and I'm adding on to you. Did I answer your question? Or as much as I know?
Yeah.
Okay. Pshita. Gufa, Amar of Nachman. We just quoted a statement that Rav Nachman said, if you had two documents about the same thing, one's dated earlier, one's dated later, the second one nullifies the first one. Amar, or negates the first one. Amar Papa, motor of Nachman di Yosef, Badikla Tosefes Kasve. And that if he added a palm tree to it, he wrote it to add to the original first star. So the Gemara says, Pshita Rishon b'Mecha Risheni b'Matana liafos kochohu. Because of so it's obvious, it's simple that if he had originally sold him the first thing, and now the second star, he's adding this palm tree as a gift. Liafos kochohu dekasavle. He's doing it to increase the benefit of the recipient. Mishum dina de bar metzra, because of the halacha of bar metzra. So the halacha of bar metzra is that if someone wants to sell a field, basically there's a first right to the neighbors, because if you own an adjoining field, it's much more efficient for you to have one bigger field to plow and harvest. If you would have two fields that aren't adjoining, it's a bigger pain in the neck to schlep your tools and equipment from one field to the other field. So if you sold your field to someone else without advertising it, and your neighbor said, I wanted to buy that field, so the person who bought it is going to lose the field, because the halacha of bar metzra, a meitzer is like, in Tehillim we said mina meitzer from the depths, but in the Gemara, a meitzer is like a boundary. So bar metzra, if someone shares a boundary with you, they have first dibs on getting the land. So meaning, so if so the halacha is, Rashi points out that if someone owns a field through a gift, the halacha of bar metzra doesn't apply. So if the neighbor says, I wanted to buy that field, where you sell, I didn't sell the field, I gave it. So bar metzra only applies when I wanted to sell the field. I have to let my adjoining neighbor buy it first, but not as a gift. V'kol shekain, and certainly that rishon b'matana v'sheni b'mecher, if he originally gave him the field and then he added through the second thing as a sale, damrina mishum dina de balchov hu dekasav kain. He wrote this because of the halachos of creditors. So, in regard to balchov, if something was written after a sale, or excuse me, if there was a creditor from before the sale, depending on the date of the thing, someone who bought it after the sale, and this is what we were talking about, a ksuva, the field can be taken away from the seller and he'll just have to get money, but the field goes to the person who has the lien against it. So if the original one, if the original one was a gift and the second one was sold, so he's doing him a favor. Well, it depends when, but only creditors. So if it's a gift, he wouldn't get money back if the creditors took the field in payment of the debt. But if it was sold, he would get payment back. So when the original owner originally wrote it as a gift, and then he wrote a second star as a bill of sale, it was better for the recipient to have a bill of sale, because now if creditors against the first guy would take the field, he'd get paid from them for the value of the field. He wouldn't have the field, but he'd have the money of what it's worth. My time, so why in general, if not for these reasons, why does the second star cancel out the first? Rafam Amar Amar Uduyu Urile. One reason is because they're admitting that there was something wrong with the first star. The first star was puzzle. So Rashi says that the Baal Shtar, in this case, would be the recipient, the seller, the buyer. The buyer is saying that the first one was forged in somehow, and the reason that they would play around with the dates is, again, would it be liable to creditors? Would creditors be able to take it out? Rav Acha says the reason is Eimer Achuli Achul Shibude. The reason that they wrote a second thing is that the buyer was mochel having it indebted. Meaning if it was originally sold and then given, he's a little bit less secure, but he was willing to forego or to waive that the fact that creditors wouldn't be able to seize it from him. So basically, it's a bit worse for himself, but he's saying that if that he would let the creditors from the first guy take it, and then he wouldn't have anything anymore. My benai, what's the difference between Rafram's reason that it was fraudulent and Rav Acha about that he was being mochalet? Ika benaihu uri saadeh. So one would be if the witnesses would be not believed. If the problem is the first reason, so once the Adam signed on a forged star, so they were Adam on something that wasn't true, so they're pasula Adas. They would be disqualified from serving for Adam for something else. But if the reason is Rav Acha, that the recipient or the buyer waived some of his rights, so there's nothing wrong with the Adam. The Adam would be still kosher. Ulashlume peri. The second nafkamina would be, does the second guy have to give restitution for the first guy for, let's say if it was an orchard, he was eating some of the fruits in the meantime, in the dates in between the first star and the second star. If the first star was really good and the second is just, they're making it separate agreement, it really was the second guy's field from the earlier date, and he wouldn't have to repay it. If the first star really wasn't okay, the second guy would have to pay back the first guy for the benefit that he got from the field in between the two dates. So if he ate $100 worth of oranges in the meantime, the second guy would have to pay the first guy $100 back for the oranges because the first star wasn't really kosher. The transaction never took place then. So he was eating the oranges that really weren't his yet. Ulataska, and also in regard to paying taxes. So in Cook County this time of year, when's the tax bill going to come out? We don't know. So it's a similar thing. So if the king or whoever would charge a tax in between the first two times, in between the two dates. So according to Rafram, the seller, the original one, the seller would have to pay it because the first transaction never really took place because it was fraudulent. So it was still owned by the first guy, the seller, at the time that the tax bill came out. And according to Rav Acha, the transaction really took place from the first star, and they're just modifying part of their agreement for the second one. So the second guy would pay the tax bill. My havi ala diksuva. So that was in regard to a regular star. But what about specifically about a ksuva with two dates? Tashma, here's a brisa. The Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mishmo Mishum Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Shimon. Well, it's actually not a brisa, it's just Amoraim. But Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, in the name of Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Shimon, Mana Masayim min ha'erisin, v'tosefes min ha'nesuin. The 100 or 200, meaning the Iker Ksuva, she collects from the time of the erisin, v'tosefes min ha'nesuin, but any additional money is from the time of the chuppah. V'chachamim omer echad zeh v'echad zeh min ha'nesuin, v'hilchot zeh echad zeh min ha'nesuin. But the chachamim say the whole thing goes from the time of the chuppah, and we pass it goes from the chuppah. Mishnah. Bottom of 44a2, we're about 9 lines up from the bottom of Memdal Amid Aleph. Agioresh and Iskaira Bita Ima. So it's different, slightly different topic now. Agioresh, whose daughter converted with her. So the whole reason we say that, Tosos points out, is that a child, a little girl couldn't decide to convert herself. So if a woman converted and she already had a daughter, and the daughter also converted, Vizinsa, Harezu B'chanek, and then that girl grew up and she committed adultery as a Nara while she was only from the Erison state. So regular adultery you get chanek for, which is a more lenient death penalty, but there's a special halacha that a Nara marasa gets skila. So this girl who had converted, when she was a girl, she had converted. Harezu b'chanek. The halacha of Nara Marasa does not apply to her. She gets chanek like a regular adulteress, not the special stricter skila for Nara Marasa. Ein lo pesach beisa av lo mea sela. So then, in the case, and then if so it's not just she gets skila, it's a whole public spectacle. They go to the father's house, and the husband makes a declaration. So with those special laws wouldn't apply either. You wouldn't go to the father's house, and he wouldn't have, and if he was lying, he wouldn't have to pay 100 shekel. And he wouldn't have to pay 100 shekel if he had fabricated it. So basically, we're saying she's not, that the halach of Nar Marasa has to apply to a girl who was born Jewish. That's basically what it sounds like. The Gemara is going to clarify that a little bit. What if her mother converted while she was pregnant? So the halacha is that even though Ubra Yerach Ima, the fetus is part of the mother, but based on the halacha, the Beis Din nowadays, the Beis Din would need to know that she's pregnant, and the gerus would also go on the fetus. So if the woman converted when she was pregnant, and she was pregnant with a girl, so the conception of the baby was when the mother was not Jewish. But then Vleidosa Bikdusha, but then when the baby was born, the mother was already Jewish. Harezu Beskila. Then the halacha of Nara Marasa that she would get killed with skila does apply. But still, the laws of that the husband who's accusing her of having committed adultery doesn't go to the father's house. And if he was lying, he doesn't have to pay the 100 shekel. So it's in regard to some halachos, we do have the laws of nar marasa, and according to some of the halachos, we don't follow the regular laws of nar marasa. But if the mother converted, and after she converted, she conceived and gave birth to this baby girl who grew up, and then this thing took place, she's a full Jew for all these things. And the regular halachos of Nara Marasa, excuse me, not Nara Marasa. Oh yeah, Rashi said the word Nara Marasa about the Nara who was possibly committing adultery applies. What if she has a father, but the father has no property? So there's no house of the father to bring her to. Obviously, they live somewhere, but it's not halachically Pesach Beis Av. Or Yeshla Pesach Beis Av ve'ein la'av. Or what if the father died? There's no father anymore, but he still had a house and it's still owned by the family. So there's a Beis Av and not a father. Harezu b'skila. She still could get skila. Lo nemer Pesach Beis Av elo mitzvah. We only say that the husband, the accusing husband of her, goes to the husband's house. That's a mitzvah, but it's not the requirement. If it's impossible for him to do that, you might think the whole halacha of her getting skila and the whole thing falls apart. And so the Mishnah is saying no, that doesn't apply. The main part is skila. And if you can't do the other things, she still gets skila. It's not a get out of jail. Well, not a get out of jail, but a get out of skila card. So we turn to Mem Dalet Amud Beis Gemara Menahani Mili. So how do we know that this is about the middle case? That if she was conceived as a non-Jew, but the mother converted while she was pregnant, that she does get skila. How do we know that she does get skila? Amrei Shlakish to Amr Krava Mesa. So the pasuk in Kiseitze says, they will take the maiden to the doorway of her father's house, and the men of her city will stone her with stones, and she will die. She did a disgraceful thing in Yisrael, to commit adultery in her father's house. You'll have to get rid of the bad in your midst. That's what the pasuk says. So Reish Lakish says, but the Mesa. If you're giving her skila, isn't she going to die? So that includes another case where she dies like this, and that is where she was conceived when her mother wasn't Jewish, but she was born when after her mother converted. The Gemara says, if she's Jewish enough that she gets skila, why doesn't the husband have to go to the father's house, and why doesn't the husband, if he was lying, have to pay the 100 shekel? I mean, if she's Jewish enough for the skila, why isn't she Jewish enough for the other things? I hate to use that term, Jewish enough, but that's Amar Krav Vamesa Lamisa Linisrabs of Knas. So because this same word Vamesa, she's going to die like this, but the other halachas don't apply. The fact that if he was lying, he has to pay 100 shekel, that halacha doesn't apply. Only this girl is identical to the regular fully born Jew girl, only in regard to the death penalty. So maybe this Vamesa is including a girl whose mother converted, and she was conceived and born after mother was converted. Maybe it's coming to include her, that these halachas of skila and stuff apply to her. So Hay Yisrael Maliyasahi, she's a full Jew. We don't need a special Xeris Akasav, a special drasha to include her in those halachas. So maybe it's coming to include a girl who converted as a girl, as a young girl, like the first case in the Mishnah. Im Kain b'Yisrael Maya Hanile. Why does it say that she made a nevala b'Yisrael? So that's not applicable. So we're including someone who wasn't always Yisrael. Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina, Hamotzi Shemer al Yisoma Pater. Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina says if someone gave a false report, meaning he said that his wife was not a virgin, so the implication is she must have committed adultery after the Nisuin. But if she's a Yisoma who doesn't have a father, he doesn't have to pay the 100 shekel fine. Shenamar v'nasnu l'avianara prat lezu she'ein la'av. So, because the pasuk says he has to give the fine to the father of the maiden, and since there is no father, so in that case he wouldn't have to pay the money. The Gemara asks, "Maser Rabbi Yossi bar Avin v'tema Rabbi Yossi bar Zvida v'ime eini ma'ein aviha l'rabos yisam l'kanas di Rabbi Yossi glili." But in regard to a slightly different halacha, so this is when a girl is seduced, we say that he could marry her, but if the father refuses to marry her, then he has to pay. So so that pasuk includes that a yisoma gets the 50 shekel fine for a seduced girl. These are words of Rabbi Yossi Haglili. So even though she doesn't have he doesn't have a father, the guy has to pay the fine. So he asked the question, one of the Rav Yossi, but then he answered it. So the Brisa is talking about a case where he seduced her, but then she became a yisoma. Then her father died, so therefore he still has to pay the fine. But if she would have been a yisoma the whole time, then he wouldn't have to pay at all. Rava Amar Chayav. Rava says that a girl who doesn't have a father, the Motzi Shemra does have to pay the fine. Mimai, how do I know this? Miditani Ami, because Ami, who was an Amora, taught. Besulas, actually, it sounds like Miditani might be a Tana. Besulas Yisrael. Because Va'anshu Osome Akasef, the pasuk also in Ki, 2 psukim before the other pasuk in Kiseitze, they will punish him a fine of 100 silver, and they'll give it to the father of the maiden. Kiotzi Shemra Besulas Yisrael, because he gave a false name or a bad name on a virgin of Yisrael. Velosi Isha, he has to marry her. She has to be a wife to him. Lo Yuchal Shalcha Kayama, if he's not allowed to divorce her. So because it says Besulas Yisrael, virgin of Yisrael, below Besulas Gerim, and not the Besula of converts. So halachically, it seems in this case that the Gemara is assuming here that this is a case where a family converted. So halachically, even though they're the biological parents, but halachically, the kids don't the parents aren't the halachic parents of the kid, because the kid was converted when they were a kid. Obviously, if the parents converted and then they had a kid later, the kid's halachic parents are the biological parents. That makes sense. But at this point, we seem to be saying that Besulas Gerim would mean that the whole family converted, so the girl was already born after they converted, so her biological parents aren't halachically her parents. So if you would say in a case like this where it's Yisrael, he would have to pay the fine. That's why you need a pasuk to exclude the case that Gerim wouldn't have to pay the fine. But if you'd say in this case of Yisrael, he would be exempt, meaning a girl without a father would be exempt from the husband of the Jewish girl without a father would be exempt when he accused her of not being a virgin, which means that she committed adultery under him. So if she was a Yisoma, he wouldn't have to pay. We wouldn't need Exeris HaKasuf to exclude Gerim, because it would be the same case. It would mean the girl without a father, a halachic father. But if Rava says, if the in this case a regular Jewish girl, the person who accused her of this would be pater from the fine, has to be straw pater b'gerim. Why would you need a special pasuk to exclude the children of Gerim from the person who falsely accused them to give a fine? There would be no difference. So that's how Rava says that a regular orphan girl whose father was died would still receive the fine, because the fact that we have a pasuk to exclude Gerim family from the fine would mean in a similar case, if they were a Jewish girl without a father, her father died, she would get a fine. Therefore, you need a drasha that if a whole family converted and then someone would accuse that girl of Motzi Shemra, of having committed adultery, they would not give the fine. So we will leave it here.